In contrast, the image of the African descendant was that of the coon, the shine, the buffoon, the criminal, with the object lesson dangling from a tree. The African American's disorientation, as identified Du Bois, is the defining feature of her experience in North America, the notion of irreconcilability at the core of the dilemma. It can be argued by extension that the African diaspora is the quintessential imagined community, within which a 500-year conversation has been ongoing in myriad languages and cultural expressions over the meaning of loss and displacement. Broadly conceived and not limited to black people, there are and have been many diasporas of cultural, ethnic, racial, religious communities, in some instances converging and occupying proximate positions. We have arguably called these diasporas by other names. European colonialism comes to mind as a candidate. With respect to the African experience or set of experiences that we continue to call the one colonialism and the other diaspora, is itself instructive. The former is associated with power, advantage, mastery, the spread of civilization, scientific and technological progress. Wakatha, wakatha. Diaspora, on the other hand, is the backside of that story, the flip side of the coin. The unappreciated context for the building of the Panama Canal, the overlooked aspect of the emergence of manufacturing and shipping in the American North, etc. It features the lives of those whose labor added exponentially to the glories of the Ancien regime, these inhabitants of the Medinas and favelas, these millions who toiled and lived and loved in obscurity. Diaspora is the underbelly of the beast and is concerned with civilization's human costs, striving to remember what the narrative of progress seeks to forget. And what is truly arresting in the diasporic story, what is both unsettling if not threatening, is that it recreates these experiences as constitutive of linked communities, that while derivative of imperial and colonial interventions are not simply subsidiary to them, but exist in and of their own right. What remains to be better conceptualized is the place of Africa as not simply source of diaspora, but also as destination, as well as hub and ongoing conduit in multiple directions, thus disrupting the unidirectional flow of discourse and demonstrating its enduring quality. This is quite the challenge, for to bring Africa and diaspora into closer conversation is to threaten scholarly convention while suggesting the disruption of colonial and imperial order, which of course presupposes their existence. How to productively understand the relationship between Africa and its diaspora is only recently, relatively speaking, becoming a matter of formal graduate training. And as such, the transgression of boundaries can be disorienting and discomforting. For me, an initial step in identifying more useful frameworks necessitates the reimagining of space. Scholars of Indian Ocean studies are certainly pioneering this re-engineering of human interaction, effectively arguing that expanses of water are no less connecting than their terrestrial counterparts. Indeed, the entire transnational project rests on our capacity to reconfigure space, if not to displace preceding paradigms, to certainly complement them. The colors and sounds of diaspora are therefore tempered with darker hues and melancholic refrains born of experience, more so than physiognomy. Loss is at the core of these sights and sounds. The loss of home, family, friends, security, and health, physical and mental. The transatlantic slave trade, as an example, represents the ultimate mechanism of separation from the familiar and the introduction of the absurd. The navigation of the lands of the macabre, in turn, reflect the dilemma of these traumas. As the vast majority had no means of returning home, their descendants necessarily undertaking the difficult work of reconsidering the land of rejection as somehow home, or not. This would lead to tension with enslaved and the emancipated facing seemingly intractable contradictions. They were enslaved, but now free, but free to do what, to be what, given their non-citizenship status, based upon conditions they could not change. The conditions and legacies of bondage and non-bondage, as opposed to freedom, a qualified exile, with potential for achieving either some level of recreation of home in societies with black majorities or a measure of liberty in societies with black minorities, constituted an indeterminacy of belonging, yet another hallmark of the diasporic plight, with resolution of the problem approached from a variety of angles, from acquiescence to agitation for full citizenship to withdrawal of emotional and psychic investment. Wrestling with the present in light of the past and in anticipation of an uncertain future, A perversive restlessness characterizes the exilic dimension of diaspora in its negotiation of the arguably irreconcilable. In whatever manner the search for remedies to the dilemma of sojourn is taken, there awaits for every person the need to confront the issue of return. Stated differently, each person will have to answer the question most famously phrased in County Cullen's Heritage, what is Africa to me? To be sure, for some, if not many, the answer is to affect distance. But for others, the question persists. It is there, it will always be there, searching for the means of return, quote unquote, of some sort, in some dimension, whether physical of either short or long durée, or in the form of a spiritual or psychological quest, or even a cultural embrace, or some combination thereof. But of course, the great conundrum has been the unattainable nature of the polarities. Africa, once lost, has yet to be recovered, whereas the Americas or Europe, as a collective ideal, has yet to become whole. This is the essence of the African diaspora of Du Bois's Tunis. This inability to achieve wholeness of spirit and vision, this desire to be made whole, this yearning to overcome the debilitation of a fractured consciousness. It should therefore come as no surprise that such forced displacement would result in the search for a return to equilibrium, in the organization of a social ensemble in which, to the furthest extent possible, wrongs are righted, wounds are healed, dignity is restored. It is to an early stage of such recovery that Malcolm refers when saying that during the pilgrimage he felt like a complete human being for the first time in his life. Diaspora is one means by which the Gulf may be forded. As was true of London for Robeson and Mecca for Malcolm, it offers the possibility of a different type of space. As a cultural construct and academic project, it features competing visions. One approach, for example, is to locate diaspora's origins within the dawn of European expansion, and that as a consequence of their immersion in the cultures of Europe, diaspora is but a part of Western civilization. That the person of African, or for that matter Asian or Orthodox descent in the Americas, is only an extension of the Western imagination, if not a most splendid example of its creativity and ability to reproduce itself in variegated form. As such, there is really nothing African about the diaspora save its obvious origins in the continent. That is, the very concept of the African diaspora is deeply and inextricably wed to the rise of the West, with all else either having been virtually obliterated or of quaint consequence. As such an interpretation privileges power and might, it is not an analysis of what actually happens when communities of diverse cultures meet and exchange and engage in exchange, even within context of the most extreme political social disequilibrium, which is precisely what the transatlantic trade in human beings was. The exchanges were and are extensive and significant. Languages, religious expression and beliefs, agricultural and mining techniques, building techniques and spatial orientations, culinary tastes, musical genres, the adornment of the body, etc., are all affected in multiple directions, to say nothing of the exchange of genetic code. And though English and French or Portuguese may operate as official languages, they no longer sound the same, as they are infused with inflections and rules of conjugation owing to African sensibilities. Power, in tandem with language as a written medium, helps to explain why these languages were not utterly transformed. Before embracing any particular interpretation of these experiences, the historian of Africa and/or its diaspora sits before a vast array of information, culled from archives and repositories, from interviews with subjects living and dead, from material culture as well as sonic memory. She is fluent with the historiography, the ways in which the history has been written or discussed over the years and generations, while mindful of the attendant debates, controversies, and issues awaiting resolution. Her objective is to create a coherent narrative informed by the evidentiary base and in a manner as creative and innovative as possible, so as to make a genuine contribution, to say something new about something old, to intervene into the historiography in a fresh and meaningful way. To accomplish this, she must arrive at a central thesis. She must make an original claim for which she marshals her materials. This is the craft of the historian. This is what we do. But in so doing, it is not possible to avoid bringing something of ourselves into the process. This is evident as the historian is participant in all facets of society, including the